So this session aims to present you the state of play of our action plan. So in order to see what we've done and where we are at, and so here you have the 5 rare disease working group chairs seated. And so we will go through each of the work package and we will see where we are at. So first, the work package is to share experience and discussion of difficult clinical cases. So for this, we have the monthly working group rare disease meetings. And so the idea is really to offer clinical virtual consultation, and afterwards it will be through the CPMS system, which will be explained after by the Commission. So it is really the core activity of the ERN. So we will ask the chair to report a bit on this. So, micro.
So let me say from, is it HHT first?
It doesn't matter. It's the order you want.
If you want to go in that order.
Ladies first, that's the only rule.
Okay, so if HHTs first, we've discussed 7 cases so far. Each case is suggested by a clinician who has found the case difficult to manage even within their own expert centre. And we, I think, unanimously have found these an incredibly useful path. We discuss the case. In the olden days, we would send emails and we would just say, what do you think? And somebody would say, I think this, and somebody else would say, I think that. And then there would be a sort of consensus. But now we have formal documentation. We also have exchange by discussion, which is really helpful. So we build on each other's experience. And then we summarise them all, ready for upload. We have 3-page summaries for each case that's been discussed, as well as a very short summary, which can be shared with a full working group.
Yes, I'm going along with Claire. With the HTAD group, we have been having case discussions since July, so we have had 3 case discussions so far. And I must say that the enthusiasm in the group is very high to do this. It makes the calls also more attractive, I think, instead of discussing all the administrative things. So I hope that in the future these case discussions will be the main topic of our monthly calls. I hope it will evolve that way. We maybe so far I think no one has had formal ICF documents to discuss these cases. And my question maybe to the organization too is, can we post these cases on the website already? Is that allowed? Is that legal? Maybe these issues will be discussed later today.
Yeah, I think yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So we have to wait for that. That is part of the difficulty of the exercise.
I agree with the same thing. I think with vascular EDS, we've discussed around 5 cases so far. 4 cases so far, and actually they have been very useful to get people's opinions. What would be much more helpful, I think, which we have to discuss, is there will be a representative from each head CP, but actually for wider participation of people like the vascular surgeons, because there might be their involvement necessary in management of these cases as well. So that would be really helpful, I think, to add to patient management. But I agree with Julie and Claire that this is the most enjoyable part of the meeting in a way, probably because we feel like we are making a difference to the patient care.
I'm from Paediatric and Primary Lymphedema, and we've discussed 4 cases. And that's been the only thing we want to do so far.
So I see this is ladies first. So we in the VASCA have discussed 6 cases, and I agree completely what has been said before. So we usually try to do 1 hour of the other things, and then we continue with the patient discussions, because then the patient association representative at that moment disconnects from the discussion. We had some problems because we were using Skype at the beginning. Now with the WebEx it's better, and so perhaps with the platform it will be even better.
So now we go to the second work package. So about the definition of patient pathways. So our plan is to have a 5 rare disease working group patient pathways by the end of our first year of activity. So yeah.
Just a word to take an example to explain to everybody what is a patient pathway, because it's not obvious in the medical language. So the example is coming from the HTAD group. You have the presenting feature, you have the multidisciplinary clinical evaluation, you have the clinical diagnosis, you have the final diagnosis and the follow-up, and you see the different possibilities here. And what I wanted to show you is that according to the presenting feature, the pathway may differ. You see, this is aortic dissection. The question is here, you have to get the full evaluation. But if you have ectopia lentis, it was suggested here that you could go directly to molecular biology. It's not important to say if it's true, it's not true. It's just the idea that you may have a position which differs and skeletal features. The important thing is try to, it usually is not HTAD, so you want to eliminate the diagnosis as soon as possible. And this is with cardiac ultrasound. Is that enough? If it's no, should we stop in adults or follow up into children? So, and if you have the mutation identified in the family, you go directly to the molecular biology. Back to Marine.
So now we can maybe each shared can say where they are in this.
So we wanted to involve our patient pathways with our patient representative as well. So Jorgen's speaking to Valentina, who's actually been quite helpful in doing the HTAD ones, to develop similar ones for the medium-sized arterial vessels, specifically vascular EDS. One of the things that we were also looking at is how they would present and when they would present. Like, for example, if a patient presents with a bowel rupture, what would your patient pathway be? In addition to what if the patient represents with an aortic dissection, for example. So those are the scenarios that we are considering.
So our decision was not to work on this until we get some nice layouts from the other group so that we are not reinventing the wheel. And I've already learned here 2 things, like the HTAD was great there, these different kinds of beginnings, so I think we can use that. And also the fact to involve the patient group. So this is something for VASCA, I think, now that we have some nice ideas.
We've just started working on a draft, which I'm hoping we'll discuss tomorrow and make some progress with that.
In the HHT group, this hasn't been a major focus of our activity over the last 6 months, but we did revise our version 1 that had been submitted, so we now have version 2 that's been discussed and approved by the patient group and uploaded. So we have completed our revisions, though there were not many revisions to what was initially submitted. Like VASCA, I think we feel that at this stage there are some other more pressing priorities for us to address, but we have got our revised pathway there.
Yeah, for the HTAD group, you've seen the drafts that have been made, and we will go on discussing the entry scenarios which need to be defined, and some specific issues as imaging modalities and things like that. I hope that we will come to a consensus across Europe, because even within one country, the modalities tend to differ, and I think that will be the most critical issue.
Just a word to say this is important to define also the recommendation, because once you have that, it's easy to write recommendations, and the EU is waiting eagerly to these pathways.
So then our third work package is the cross-border pathway mobile application, which is developed by the ELS working group. And now we will ask Alessandro Pini, the chairs of the ELS group, to present this.
So the mobile application has been developed in 2015 in Lombardy in order for the Expo in 6 languages, and is devoted to help the patient with rare disease to identify the right expertise center and to be localized where the patient is, and then to illustrate the opportunities to go to this center and the way to go also. For this reason, we have compiled a data set that is that contains the most important information from the patient, and the data set has been sent to all HCPs of the ERN, and we are collecting it. But we have by now a problem that will be solved that is related to the patient association, as we have a limited number of patient association, but the RDs have sent us a document that is more wide, the number of patient association. And so a second call for this information will be collected. And tomorrow, we asked tomorrow on Sunday, we asked to have from the ACPs and patients associations that are related to the VASCERN to give us the datasheet compiled. If someone has any problem in fill it, we are here with Alessia Paglialonga and Raffaella Gaetano in order to help you, in order to collect as many data set as possible. And so the next step will be to put all the informations within the database in order to create the application. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. So if you didn't complete that yet, you can contact either Alessandro or Alessia or Raffaella, and if you don't remember who they are,
I told that we are here in order to be contacted.
You have the picture of them.
No, work package 4, it's Pills of Knowledge. So this is also developed by the eHealth group, which is also eHealth and Training Education group. So e-learning, it's an e-learning tool.
Maybe I can explain that. So this has been the subject of a lot of discussion until now, and we arrived to the idea that Peers of Knowledge will be two things: one video, short video, 3 minutes, questions chosen by the Rare Disease working groups and the EPAG, and short experts interview in native languages. And so, as we have a lot of native languages, we will have a lot of short native interviews in different languages. So there will be more than one video on one subject, and it will be made available on the website and YouTube channel. So this is what we call Peers of Knowledge, the initial idea. And on top of that, on the website, we think it would be useful to have a list of useful links after the Rare Disease Working Group validation. So there are people who are collecting all the information about a specific disease which is available on the web. And this information then goes and is discussed into the Rare Disease Working Groups. And when it's validated, it's put on the website with the link to this information. This is adding value with a minimum work, which is what we are all aiming at.
Now, registry, work package 5. So the chair of the registry working group, Leo Schulz-Kohl, will present us the report.
Okay. There's a question?
No, question at the end, maybe.
Okay.
For the previous, no? Yeah, it was for the previous. It was for the previous subject.
Well, we will discuss all that this afternoon. I'm afraid we will be short of time. We have time this afternoon. We will discuss all that during the board.
Sorry. Okay, the plan was for the registry was basically to go for a bottom-up approach. To start with local registries, well, it's not completely true, but it basically avoids privacy and control issues. And to start with minimal databases, because if you really want to fill in a registry during your consultation, it can be quite hard. And I tried that. What I did is basically we formed a technical subgroup of Marco Roos, Christian, Jerome, Dirk Arts, and Hugo Storff, and I think we really have the good guys on board. We are part now of the steering group for GoFair. And we wrote a grant application for FAIR-based patient signal bank. That's a collaboration with the patient organization. I think this one is really important because last week we have been asked to join a youth consortium for a health data network, which could provide us the, let's say, the input on how to, anyway, to transfer the local databases which we're going to set up into a larger database over Europe. So I hope that everybody agrees that we should basically join this. And that's still open, and basically I will discuss that later on. Thank you.
Work package 6, it's about clinical trials. So where we the older heart disease working group will make a short reporting on the clinical trials during the last 6 months and the projects going on for the next months and the research project as well. So we have already some reporting that we can the chairs could explain a little bit maybe.
Well, I can be very brief. For the HTAD group, we have no clinical trials going on at this moment, so it's not a focus within our group.
So in HHT we have benefited from the French network led by Sophie Dupuy-Giraud, and they have just completed their first trial. They have 2 ongoing trials, and in London we have just had a new trial funded. We are very conscious that most of the work we do has been observational research based. Clinical trials that demand so much input in time to set up the ethical approvals and regulatory approvals even in one country, and our plan, Sophie, is it all right if I suggest what you were going to say? Our plan is that we will initially perform the trials probably in a pilot phase locally before then embarking on full ERN involvement the following year should the results prove promising, because it is a vast amount of work to set up and run a clinical trial.
I'm aware of our local research trials, which are not clinical trials, and tomorrow we'll sit down and find out what's going on in all the other centres. So at the moment we haven't done that.
So in the VASCA working group, there's one clinical trial that was first started locally, and then Laurence started to set up a European level trial, and it has been a huge hurdle, and it has really kind of frozen us to think of anything like that ever in the future. And we think that and what we feel is that we would need to do it locally in each country the same way, but as each one is a local, and then gather the data, but not to state from the beginning that it's a multi-center trial, because it's we don't have the manpower to do that, and also it's very expensive. So these are big issues also, I think, to put up towards EU, that if they want clinical trials, we need a lot of support for that, a lot.
We're also exploring the French clinical trial with Xavier Jeanmaître, and actually the main issue we have, again, because it involves drugs, who is going to dispense them, how are patients going to benefit from it, and if it's not just the drugs, but actually the imaging after that, is there a central place to actually send all these images to, so that it will be all the data will be collected properly. So I think we are going to discuss it tomorrow to see how to make it possible, so that every center, every head CP will participate. But there are a lot of teething problems which we will probably keep you updated with.
Yeah, if I can add to that, that was one of the major problems, is the pharmacies in the hospital, how to handle the drugs and the company. So what we didn't even think about, but it's actually a major issue.
Can I just ask, is there maybe a misunderstanding? Does this really mean clinical trials or just trials of any kind? Would that be like
Drug trials or other operation, surgery trials?
Yeah, like,
that would be a clinical trial, I think.
Clinical trials is just a minor issue. I mean, you can do a lot of other beneficial research. outside of clinical trials.
So this is the problem with the definition of clinical trial. So the clinical trial definition means that most of the research that's conducted within our HHT working group, many of us are publishing 10 papers a year, most of that research does not count as a clinical trial because it has not been set up in keeping with the clinical trials requirements. And so as we are being held to clinical trials, we are being held to this. And I think we can turn this to our advantage because we do want to be doing these clinical trials. It is very difficult to get funding for them, particularly in a rare disease where we don't have the big support. And this is something that the Commission could potentially really help us with. They want the clinical trials, so do we, but it's just the practicalities of how we get the funding to do it. So over to you, Guillaume.
Yeah, I think they are listening to you. Thank you. This is the aim of the meeting.
Yes.
One aim of the meeting.
I hope we can take that message back because as a surgeon we want to do surgical trials also or different, there are many different trials to be done. So
But they-
we take that
Okay,
message
and
back.
just
Don't
a-
ask for clinical trials.
No, it's any intervention. It could be surgery, it could be taking blood, it could be giving a medicine, but there are certain requirements that define it as a clinical trial. So surgery's in there.
Okay, so be above being a clinical trial, what we want is European clinical trial, which means that at least 2 different countries have to participate, HCPs from 2 different countries. That will be a criteria. Otherwise, it will not count. So, because everybody is doing clinical trials in their own place.
So then we have the 7 work package, which is about availability of conferences on YouTube. So this is a e-health e-learning tool also, and training and education tool which will be developed. So it's not yet developed, but the plan is to collect video for the YouTube channel. So it will be medical content. So these are the pills of knowledge and meetings. So the e-health group will discuss about the content, e-health and training group. And rare disease working groups would validate this medical content to be disseminated as a video. And then there are also the videos such as this meeting, which is being filmed. So, for instance, it will be disseminated. And also we plan these interviews during the year. So this was what was suggested also by Miikka. So, yeah, these are the plans for the diffusion of videos. Then there is the work package 8, which is the definition of clinical outcomes for all the rare disease working groups. And so
you see the slide? More complicated than anticipated, delays. Wait for decision from the EU on monitoring of ERN, and there is inter-ERN's working group. We spoke about that already, about monitoring the ERNs with some parameters. And there's a lot of discussion about that, and we will discuss more thoroughly this afternoon. But I think really it's more complicated than that was initially thought. So we will have delay for that. Some of them will be derived from the pathways, but there are some simple ones, such as how many different states are part of the ERNs. But there are some more sophisticated ones.
So in the VASCA working group, there was a project initiated already 2 years ago. We had the International Society, or 4 years ago, we had the International Society for the Study of Vascular Anomalies. And there was kind of a web-based consultation, what you think should be measured from each patient. And you see, 4 years ago it was started. Now there is a paper that is coming out. It's in press at the moment. But there are still lots of question marks, and actually even patients and physicians don't always agree what is a good measure of effectiveness. So it's actually not that simple.
It's very difficult. I think we were you want to say something, Matt?
The working group which you're talking about in terms of outcomes for the network, so more network outcomes. The key thing which will drive forward learning and outcomes for patients is by agreeing by rare disease 2 or 3 simple outcome measures which become the currency to be able to compare practice between each of the centres. as a network of how many centres across Europe, you should be celebrating the variation in clinical practice because it's the hotbed of innovation and new approaches. But you need to have a currency of 3 or 2 outcomes which triangulate around a disease, tell a story about a disease. And when one practice in one centre you can see is better, because then you start to steal each other's approaches and care just moves forward naturally.
I'd like to clarify this because I discussed this when we had the HTAD meeting last time as well. Clinical outcomes, as in what patients experience and what how we make a difference, is different to what Guillaume is talking about, which is how many patients you're seeing or how many diagnoses you're making. So the network outcomes are different, and clinical outcomes in terms of how effectively we are caring for the patients is different. And perhaps we need to differentiate both of them and put them separately. But in this context, it's about network outcomes in terms of what data we are collecting to be able to say that we are fulfilling the criteria for being a HCP.
No, that's my fault. I was the outcome is the outcome. The idea behind that was the outcome of the patient. Yes. So Matt is right. That was the outcome of the patient, not the outcome of the network. I made a mistake.
So what we've done in HHT is select outcomes that differentiate for the patient between being looked after in a centre that knows what they're doing and looked after by doctors that do not. So a typical example is an arteriovenous malformation identified in the lungs. Good centres will automatically advise on dental care, antibiotic prophylaxis. Everybody else does not. So we have that as an outcome. The patient has an outcome of receiving that advice, and it clearly differentiates good care from inadequate care. And that will then stimulate everybody else to do that, take that route. So we've selected outcomes that are important for patients, but also clearly differentiate the worst. Aiming not to then differentiate the best from the second best, but it's to bring the worst up to speed.
I'm really unclear about what we need to be discussing in each working group. So if you could clarify what you want from us, that would be enormously helpful. You know, if you want just 2 or 3 clinical outcomes, we can discuss that and what. So that would be a good discussion.
Okay, so we will have that this afternoon, but to be simple, it's the idea was first the pathways, and derived from the pathway, we can have 1 or 2 indicators that we can follow. That was the But that's not that easy, actually. That's much more difficult than anticipated. That was my slide.
So then we have the work package 9 on writing a recommendation and clinical guidelines. So the plan is to have guidelines for each rare disease working groups, and there are 2 different kind of guidelines. The first one are the clinical guidelines. And so the chairs can explain where they are about that.
So I'll start with the MSA, and Alessandro Pini and his team have agreed to start guidelines on how to manage pregnancies in vascular EDS. So that's still in progress, and we'll probably be discussing it later today.
So in the VASCA working group, we've really started, and we work tomorrow on the orphanet classification, because our field is a bit newer in a sense, or not as defined as the others, so we still have problems in the classification and the diagnostic names of the diseases. So we want to clarify first that, and then get to guidelines and all the rest. Also in the ICD classification, until now, we don't have epidemiology because people had to use some other diagnostic names, so we really don't know how many patients there are. And so the orphanet is the first one, then we try to do the ICD, and then get to the guidelines. We already have several guidelines in different countries also, and we know that there are some other networks that want to do guidelines, so we try to also collect everybody together and then to make one set of guidelines, hopefully on some kind of a web format that we could then make it evolve, because we have, 40, 50 diseases, so they will evolve all the time. We are so new, in a sense, for all these diseases.
For primary lymphedema, we're collecting what exists already, and we're going to we're planning to work on the existing guidelines because it takes a lot of time, and this is all extra to our day jobs. so I think we'll work on what we have already.
So similar sentiments from HHT. Guidelines is a vast amount of work. We've pursued a two-step approach. The first thing we did was collected what had already been published, and we have annotated those on our website. We've removed some that we didn't feel were appropriate, and we've left some others on with a 2017 benchmark comment from VASCERN. The second phase is that we've identified areas where there is absolutely nothing to guide, and we are going to put together small guidance documents piecemeal so that ultimately we will end up with something big, but rather than trying to do everything at once, which we will just fail because we have not got the time. This is weekend and evening work, and very late at that. So we are going to be realistic, and the first topic we selected over the first 6 months, which would be the priority for the next 6, was antiplatelet and anticoagulant use, particularly the newer oral anticoagulants and their use in this field. And this might be one where this could be a nice working group topic, actually, because we see different patterns with the NOACs to warfarin in these patients. So maybe that would be a really nice interactive group one. Just a thought.
Yeah, for the HTAD group, we have decided to pick one of the many diseases that we are also dealing with, and we decided to start writing recommendations, and Ingrid van der Laar has taken the initiative on drafting something on ACTA2 disease, knowing that there's definitely no evidence-based medicine, since these are small groups of patients and it's a disease that is only known for a couple of years. So it will be expert opinion, but based on this, we hope that we will gather more information, and at this moment we are collecting cases within our group to identify discussion items that will be discussed in our meeting tomorrow. And then together with Alessandro, and as Leema has already mentioned, and maybe this is also something that we could do ERN about the follow-up and management of pregnant patients with these diseases. I think this is also something that could involve all the other groups, and it is a critical issue that there's no clear guidance on that either.
Just a comment to say that we call that clinical guidelines, but this is critical. This is not clinical guidelines. In fact, there is no data to support in its expert opinion in most of the cases, and although it's called clinical guidelines, it will be probably expert opinion.
Can I add to that the British Thoracic Society, that championed guidelines initially, has developed a new model that we've used for pulmonary AVMs, and the first we're going through as the first example to be published in Thorax this month. Instead of going through the guideline process, which is very demanding and depends on evidence which is just simply not there for rare diseases, and recognising we are essentially using expert opinion, anecdotes, observational studies at best, what they have come up with is a strategy called a clinical statement, which has been carefully defined, and as I say, will be published in the next month, whereby a group of experts review their practice based on the evidence available and their working practice. They do not say we recommend, they do not say you should, they simply state what is good practice. It can go from start to finish in a year. We started last May, our paper was accepted in the May, and we went through a public consultation process and 2 rounds of peer review. So it is possible to really deliver in the space of a year to 18 months something very, very useful without having to embark on the 2-3 year process of a guideline to identify that the data aren't there.
Okay, there is an ERN working group specific for that, and which is discussing these issues, because the guidelines probably is not the right word. You want to say something?
I'm not hugely familiar with the rare diseases in this network specifically, but with multi-system rare diseases, they obviously cut across the different ERNs. So I just want to check that we're not working in another silo. Is there work being done developing guidelines for conditions which you're covering between other networks?
Yeah, we said that when there is overlap between two networks, then the two networks will be involved. Yeah.
Should we say, are you aware? So we're not aware of any other ERNs that are active in these areas. The diseases don't overlap.
Yeah, there is some overlap with the VASCERN.
So we have Andrea is here, and he's also in the skin network, so he's our connection to the other network where vascular anomalies are partially
and
there.
Leo also, I think, in the other way around.
Yes, you also, yes. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
So,
but Andrea is really active in the other center that is there.
We have connection with other URNs in case of...
So the second kind of recommendation, it's the fact sheets are on the optimal care for rare disease patients facing common problems not related to their rare disease. So this actually exists in French. It has been developed by the French network FAVA Multi on rare vascular disease. So it exists for HTAD, MSA, and HHT. So this is, for instance, an example of fact sheet on HHT. And the idea is to translate from French to English, so for those existing working groups, and so that the VASCERN rare disease group update them or validate them, and then it will be the idea would be to publish and disseminate, and then in another step to translate in other language. And there is also the question of extending it to the two other working group, rare disease group, for which it doesn't exist yet, but yeah, it's for the future.
No, just you said everything. Okay, that's the way it is now. You can go. There is no comment here.
So then the last work package is on communication. So this is about our website and newsletters, the Twitter, and it will be further developed with social networks or Facebook, for instance, and also the website will be updated and will have new section. It will be improved. And we have also this new tool for internal communication, which is the collaborative platform. So this is for internal communication. So yeah, the one of our mission is really to disseminate the more that we can. So communication is important.
Yeah. So I want to give the Bart. You wanted to ask a question. It was a long time ago. Do you remember the question?
We can discuss it this afternoon. But I was wondering, it was listed that the questions would be harmonized for the interviews, but maybe it's also important to harmonize some of the answers that's in the different countries.
Yes, we'll try to do that.
So now we have some time for question and answers.
I think one thing that would be very useful for a patient is maybe to have discussion of patient within the groups and be able, for example, if we see atypical lesion that we would need expertise from the other working group, it would be great to set up some kind of a way to be able to discuss this patient with the other working group.
Yeah. I think this will be addressed this afternoon by the CPM or later today. The idea is not just to limit the people participating in the CPMS to the HCPs of the ERN, but maybe to extend that to other participants when needed. So it can be one working group with another working group, I guess, in specific cases.
Great.
Was just curious to know how far you involve so far the learned societies, because it was mentioned at the national level, but you have also, yes, EVSM and other European Society on Vascular Disease. So what is so far your connections? Are there also motor in providing guidelines, etc.?
So the interaction between the European societies and the ERN? That is the question. So there is no formal interaction at the present time, except that when we applied, we asked for support by the European societies, and we had support from the ESC, and I don't remember the other ones because I was responsible for this one, so I remember. But we had some interaction with the societies this way, not more than that.
Do you expect money from them or granting research?
We asked money, we asked for money from them, and we didn't get any at the present time. But if you have ideas, they are very welcomed. Yes?
Among your network, do you have an organization or a tool, perhaps, to pre-identify the eligible patients for a clinical trial? To pre-identify?
Do you want to answer? No, I will answer generally, and then you will comment specifically. The short answer would be no, except if the centers by themselves have pre-identified the patients that they are taking care of, who are part of their registries. So locally, probably yes. Nationally, maybe. Internationally, no.
So I have a question. I'll answer that first. I had a point for the other one. So that's one of the things we're discussing tomorrow in the HHT working group. I've put together a case, which is an ethical case for an international access to a clinical trial, so we can discuss the ethics of what we've done. And I've also got that endorsed by the British Society for Human Genetics and Genomics, because it depends upon sharing genetic data. And we're going to have the case written up in their consent and confidentiality workshop updates by the end of the year. So what we discuss will end up being published. The suggestions that we will have, we'll have to tell you after we've discussed tomorrow. But we recognise there is a need to do this, and probably at a timescale that is quicker than setting up the full registries. We may need a halfway house. And the second point was the European societies. When they were asked to fund us, it was all, we will do this, we will do this. Now we have done. Is it worth a really good push to the European society saying, now we have achieved all of this, don't you want to be part of it? They may be more enthusiastic now than they were a year ago.
Okay.
That basically question concerns the CPNS and the WebEx. It is now accessible only for ERN members, right? Now suppose, for instance, in my country, we are the only expert center in the ERN, but there are 4 or 3 other expert centers. I want to set up a network with them. For me, it would be really helpful if it could be used CPNS and WebEx for them too.
In the CPMS, I think there will be a guest option.
Yeah, it will be a guest option. We will hear just in a minute about that, I think. Yes, they tell me yes. So, a last question. Jérôme?
This is another target that has not been mentioned earlier, but I think the drug authorities are also key to ERN, especially because there is a critical need of real-life impact data. So we talked about cohort studies, for instance, and this is typically what ERN could set up through research activities. So I think it's really important that you have contact with EMA, but also at national level with drug safety agencies to discuss about this real-life data for patient and drug use.
So that was the subject of discussion 2 days ago in the inter-RN meeting, and it is very touching. Clearly, it's not going to be solved tomorrow morning.
Elizabeth may wish to speak to the drug registry.
The drug registries, and how industry are going to be funding registries and how these registries could be part of the ERNs. That was the discussion that was 2 days ago. And
yeah, it's a very critical point, and what is on our behalf is that we tend to raise attention and dedication to the safety aspects with the drug registry. We know that there are some drugs used on an off-label indication in this context, and that should raise our attention and our dedication to collecting adverse events. That is not often the case, even outside rare diseases, and perhaps more in the field of rare disease.
Yeah, good idea. Thank you. So I think last comment?
I think that one was very relevant because the sirolimus has now gone everywhere in vascular anomalies. We have the clinical trial that we already mentioned, but we know that many physicians are using it off-label, everywhere.
Okay.
And we have no control, reporting, all that. No idea what happened.
So that would be a registry for safety, so it makes sense. So the registry for safety, the idea is going to cover us. So I think we were going to stop here. I want to thank you very much because you see that we have done a lot. You have done a lot. We have done together a lot.